his value equation peaked just when he was horny before he fucked her and then sharply declined after they had sex.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on the t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. How about yourself?
Well, I've talking about our weight loss journey. I've actually decided that to make some changes, and I have adopted your 1 meal a day strategy this week, and it's been very interesting because I think I was trying to remember, did I slag that off to you and say, oh no, it's not a good idea, and now I'm doing it, so I've become everything I hate. But I will say that I've only been doing it for 4 days this week. The results already, the changes in experience have really given me something to think about, right? It's been a really interesting experience of how your mental state changes while you're only eating 1 meal a day.
Okay, give me two key observations. What are the two things?
Yeah, so instantly when you have 1 meal a day, number one and the most effective thing is that you start feeling really self-righteous really quickly, like you're better than everyone else, and you just walk around feeling...
Is that your... Wait. So you've gone through this OMAD diet just so that you could say that to me without saying that I'm self-righteous?
No, but I'm half being serious though. There's this feeling of lightness and mental clarity that comes with just like, I don't know, it's just weird. Every faster would have experienced this kind of feeling, almost like you're floating, not walking, right? And like you feel so light and free. You have a form of mental clarity.
I think that's just you're about to faint, not
yeah. But you feel alive,
not a spiritual.
Right? You feel alive in a weird way, but like you're about to die, right? So it's like the pain shows you that you're alive.
That's one way of looking at it.
Number one, yeah, you start to feel a bit self-righteous. But on a more serious note, like I went to the shopping center the other day, and when you go to the shopping center and you're on a fast, you quickly start to realize how different you are from everyone around you, because the whole shopping center is about consumption. It's about the food, about the drinks, all this kind of stuff. And you've decided to opt out of all of it. So you're almost like walking around like a ghost, because none of that party's for you. And you would think that would be a sad proposition. But like I said, the self-righteousness kind of carries you out, and you're like, oh, look at all these people just slaves to their donuts and their their frappuccinos, and you're just sitting there and you're above it all.
I must admit, I was in IKEA earlier today, and you go to the food court or cafeteria or whatever at IKEA, and I just going in made a decision like, this food is all generally pretty shit, and if I only have so many calories that I'm eating in a day, I'm not wasting it on this on this shit.
It's always so popular though. It's always so busy.
Well, I think there's some sort of novelty and appeal to some of the stuff that they sell, but like at the end of the day, it's still being scooped out of some tray by some lunch lady with a hairnet, right?
Yeah.
So, I went into this cafeteria area kind of with the mindset of like, I'm not buying anything here. And I saw all the stuff that they had, and I was like, it was just interesting to go be in there where you just see people like grabbing like left, right, and center, like all these. Yeah, I was like, no, this is crap. I don't want it.
That's exactly what I was talking about, man. Like you kind of almost just see the rampant kind of marketing around people's vulnerabilities for food, for sugar, for fat, for salt, and yeah, it is a little bit confronting when you see it, and you've gone past that point of fasting that you're not going to break, right? You don't even feel like it. You don't feel like doing that, right?
So let's get straight to it then. Have you had a weigh-in since you started, or how many days are you into this?
Oh, I've only done it 4 days, but I was responsible and I worked my way up to it. So I haven't eaten breakfast for about 10 days. And then through the last 4 days, I've extended it all the way to dinner time.
Okay. And what, have you had a weigh-in or?
Yes, I have actually. I weigh myself every day, and which is a bit of a painful experience given my life choices in the last couple of months. But I will say, even in the 10 days, so not including the 10 days I started fasting for breakfast, but then the last 4 that I've done 1 meal a day, I've already lost 4 kilos.
Wow.
Now,
Good.
all of that, like obviously a lot of that probably is just like bloating and water, but I haven't lost 4 kilos in the preceding months that I've tried different strategies. So absolutely, like in terms of getting to an end outcome, it is pretty foolproof if you can stick to it, right?
So I wouldn't say coming out of my 1 meal a day, but I've definitely broken. Like, I think what happens with diets like these is you go through like a period, and let's say you've done 30 days, right, where you haven't done it, where you've just had 1 meal a day. The fact that you've done 30 means you're not going to, you have this thing where you can't break the record, right? You got to keep going, and like
it's
it's
the hot
this
streak mentality.
It's this taboo if you fuck it up, right? Whereas I'm past that, so I have had days where I've had, like I've had lunch and I've had dinner, right? So I haven't done 1 meal a day, and then I'll have like days like today where I won't have lunch, I won't have breakfast, but like I also had like 2 chocolate biscuits like in the middle of the day. So it's like how to place that. So it's not really a pure sort of 1 meal a day thing.
But you didn't have 3 squares kind of thing. That's
I didn't have a 12-pack of the IKEA meatballs, and I'm actually yet to have dinner. I've had a little bit of food. Like I had a bit of my son didn't finish his some of the food that we ordered for him at IKEA, and I had a bit of that. So I'm not like completely on an empty stomach. But I think the net effect for me now is that I'm not like gonna be like, yeah, I'm a bit bored, I'm just gonna like drive through McDonald's and get like a Big Mac meal just as a snack kind of thing, and it kind of stops that. So
that's a good thing, right? The binging, right?
Because it creates like it establishes like a new normal. So just before we conclude the keep ourselves honest on the weight loss journey chat, my weight loss has slowed down. Definitely, I'm still losing. So I'm still at the like a low point, like my lowest weight. Last time I weighed in, I reached like a new, kilogram number, if that makes sense. So I crossed the threshold from a 0.1 to a 0.9 kind of thing, which is good. You always like to see. I haven't weighed in for about a week, so I'm not. I for some reason, you get that feeling that you have lost weight. I'm having one of those weeks. So like I'm having a week where I feel like, yes, I probably have lost some weight this week, but I haven't seen the number yet. So I probably won't get a number for another week. So yeah.
No, it's good. And like I've been pretty upfront that I have had major self-control, self-discipline issues, right? Binging issues. And I thought that doing this 1 meal a day thing would make that 10 times worse, right? Because you're essentially depriving yourself for 23 hours in the day almost, right? And it's done the opposite so far. Now I am in very new waters, and I've only just started doing it, right? So I don't want to throw too many chips in this basket just yet, but it's done the opposite where I haven't binged. Actually, there's this kind of mental state of binging hasn't come back in a strong feeling. So it'll be interesting to see how this progresses, right?
So you've got a listener question for me.
I do. Let's get into it. These listener questions are giving us on our toes, and I feel like I know for a fact that some of the listeners are still listening. Some of the questioners are still listening because I've had some feedback. So let's keep on going. All right. So this one says, I've always been skeptical about authority and policing systems, seeing it often as a tool for maintaining the status quo rather than serving justice, especially when it comes to issues of race and equality. However, the podcast discussion on the confrontation involving Brendan Kavanagh and the Chinese group and the subsequent police interaction has left me very conflicted. While I stand firmly against racism and support anti-racist efforts, the way authority was leveraged and the police's role in the situation seemed to muddy the waters. How do you navigate situations where standing up against racism seems to align you with the very authorities that you distrust? Can you shed light on finding a balance between challenging systemic racism while maintaining a critical stance towards authority?
Do you know, as you're asking that, I just kept thinking like the Rodney King thing from like the early 90s with, the one where the LA cops.
That was the OG.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know if this answers the question, but I kind of feel like, as we discussed on the podcast episode, like the police aren't really there to serve any kind of sense of justice. They're certainly not there to police racism or anything like that. They're just there to, just make sure that all the parties are like happy enough just to go away and just it all boils over. I thought she was actually watching the video again. I thought the cop, this is the cop talking to Brendan Kavanagh. It comes over. Like, I almost felt like she was like tiptoeing around it herself because she didn't know how to express herself. Like these issues, like were almost like, because she started whispering and like, oh no, you can't say that, like, and it just felt like she wasn't prepared to talk about this topic. Like, like she wasn't schooled up in the, she didn't do the work class, when she graduated, like police academy or whatever.
Culture war kind of e-learning module.
Yeah. So she kind of just knows that like you could get in trouble here. So just whisper and like hope no one hears you, or you hope you don't say anything wrong.
I appreciate some of the conflict that this listener is feeling, right? Because I kind of play into that slot as well, where, I do think that there's this kind of general situation which that the people that are drawn to policing and authoritarian roles tends to attract people who love that power and how it can be exercised over other people, right? And I think it is a fine line, right? Because whether you attract people like that who like to abuse the power that the role gives them, or you just end up like that from dealing with so many fuckwits, it's hard to tell. And I think like about the idea of like, say, taking it away from the police force for a second, like a bouncer, right? Think of your stereotypical bouncer at a nightclub. Is it like, did they start off like that? Or did they turn into that by having to deal with so many drunk pricks that they just had to do that? And then this is the way, like if they show any sign of weakness, then it's all over for them, right? It actually invites a level of escalation if they don't have this stone face kind of like aggressiveness on them. And I think that that's a tricky thing, and something that I've been weighing up in the past, right? Because I think that, it's very hard for you to regain, like even as a parent, right? Like, or a teacher or whatever, you have that feeling like when you've lost control, it's very, very hard to reestablish the control, right? So it's better in some ways to have a general level of authority, fear, call it fear, whatever you want, so that you can maintain that rather than try to work backwards when it all blows over. And I think policing definitely falls into that category as well, right? And yeah, so I can kind of understand sometimes why this happens. I am really keen, like you said, to understand what kind of training they have in the force nowadays around like cultural aspects, right? Like these woke kind of politically correct kind of wokeisms, right? Like how are they actually training these people? And to deal with like, it's not that long since these idea of like someone auditing you by filming you and like trying to trip you up and catch you up on camera and publicly embarrass you. Like that's a relatively new thing, and I actually do wonder what kind of training that they have, so I'll be very, very keen to see that. But yeah, Mr. Listener, I'm pretty conflicted as well. I just think that this is another reason why you need to leave race at the door, right? And I actually think that playing the race card, the gender card, all these kind of different like intersectionality cards in such a public way is very much like should be removed from the culture. It should be seen as like a very, like, why are you bringing this up, right? Like you're bringing this up to kind of because you feel like your other arguments aren't strong enough. And I think that if we get to a place where maybe that is the more than accepted norm, that actually by doing that, you're showing your hand that you just, you're just wanting that to drown out all the other voices in the conversation or the debate, then I think we might see less of these kind of things happen in the future.
So Roger, I wanted to ask you, what does a teacher and a police officer have in common?
Bad moustaches?
No, they are like used to talking down to people. Like one of the things I noticed, and like I must say, this is an observation not based on the video that we're talking about, but like I've seen other videos where it's usually male teachers and police officers, and I totally get what women mean when they say mansplaining. And like, because it's just this sort of vibe of like, no, you've got to just listen to me. Like, there's no conversation here. It's just like, you've just got to listen. And then, but like where it gets really bad is where like the other person tries to get a word in, and then they say something, no, just listen to me. Now can I have my turn to say? And it's like, all they've been doing is talking the whole time. And they don't even let the other person get a word in. And so I've seen this with like some of these YouTube videos with the stirrers, like the YouTube auditor like style, kind of there to like wind people up, that kind of thing. And then there'll be like a police officer there. And actually, like generally the police I find are pretty professional in these videos, but sometimes they'll go and like they'll get like a detective or something, someone like that who's doesn't have as much like street smart, like on the ground experience, but at the same time that gets like supercharged with their position because they're like a detective, so they're like they've made it, and they come in and like the other people can't get a word in. They're like, no, just listen to me, just listen to me. Now you got this right, you got this, and then they try and like give their response like of the legitimate reason why what they're doing is okay, and they can't get a word in because they just love the sound of their own voice. It's like, if you don't like echo what they're saying and understand what they're saying in the way they're saying it. And I think teachers kind of over time pick up that same trait. So that's what I believe.
You're so right. And I think it's this dynamic around adult to child communication. And it's like, you are the child in this circumstance, right? In this scenario. And if you try to break that dynamic for me, that's going to cause problems. And let me just share just this really small one that I saw today when I was dropping my child off for school. There was this rogue student, of course a boy, sorry boys, was having this showdown, this like proper showdown with one of the female teachers, where he was like yelling and he wanted to do something. It was very hard to understand. And then one of the male teachers had enough and like stepped in to try to like lay down the law. But it got to the stage where, I don't know whether you've ever been in this exact scenario with your kids, but it gets to the stage where it's like, enough's enough. I'm going to physically try to grab you and to like pull you out of the situation or kind of talk to you in a more kind of aggressive manner. But they hide behind a table or a coffee table, and they do that cat and mouse thing where you try to like run around one side and they just run around. And it becomes physically, depending on the dimensions of the table, it becomes physically impossible to catch them because and that's what this teacher experienced. And it is the most embarrassing, shameful thing because you've got like literally like, no, you can't catch me kind of thing. Because
the kid's beating them.
Yeah, because you can't, like, you literally, there's like a table separating you. You can't actually reach the kid and you try to run and it's just so embarrassing. And I think that's such a good example of when these dynamics break down. It's like you backed yourself into a corner and they've dragged you down into the mud and beaten you with experience, right? Like it's just hilarious sometimes.
All right. So today, I think we both this week, actually, I haven't even finished the book, but I'm almost finished on Sam Bankman-Fried, who is the founder of FTX, all the crypto, all that kind of stuff. And we both read it and we thought, there's some interesting stuff in this book to have a chat about on the pod. So maybe we should start with like the background a little bit, just in case anyone really doesn't know who Sam Bankman-Fried is, doesn't really know anything about FTX, doesn't really know kind of what happened, and maybe just like the 101, just so we can all get on the same page and then we can get stuck into some of the themes. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, definitely. It was it was such an interesting book and a great recommendation from you, because I actually was dragging my heels a bit. I'm like, I don't know if I really want to open the chest on this guy and cryptocurrency and the scams, the wheelings and dealings of the finance world, the underground finance world. So the book that we actually read was called Going Infinite by Michael Lewis, The Rise and Fall of a New Tycoon. Obviously about the wheelings and dealings of Sam Bankman-Fried. But it was fascinating. It was such a good read, and I really recommend it to anyone to find out more about him. And it follows Sam Bankman-Fried's kind of ascent into where he was to being the creator of FTX. And FTX was a cryptocurrency exchange platform, so a place where people could go and buy different types of crypto coins, exchange them, and deal in futures. Essentially make bets against them, right? So this big online gambling den, essentially with cryptocurrency, gained a huge amount of prominence. When it was launched in 2019, and they had a string of celebrities that supported it, right? Like really high level celebrities. Like Tom Brady was probably the most famous, but there were heaps of people. They sponsored the hell out of everything, like lots of sporting teams and everything, and gained a lot of credibility that way. And that was like kind of what he was known for from a business sense, all right? Creating this exchange where you could deal in cryptocurrencies. But behind the scenes, obviously, there was fast forward to today where there's been charges. He's actually been sentenced and he's in jail right now for obviously mismanagement of funds. There's a whole lot of kind of finance and white collar crimes that are leveled against him. But the short story of it is, I think he's pretty much maybe like $8 or $9 billion he's kind of lost from his investors' money from FTX. So that was kind of the background on what he's achieved and what he's known for. But underneath all of that, like understanding who he is and why he did these things, there's this huge story and there's this kind of puzzle that needs to be explored, that makes it really interesting.
Yeah, so we've talked before on this podcast, we've mentioned like effective altruism a few times in the past on this podcast, but we probably haven't gone into it in any great level of detail. But this guy is like the poster child for effective altruism. Or he was, right? And in fact, in terms of effective altruism, maybe, I don't know, before all this happened, effective altruism was probably this niche sort of out there kind of club for, I don't know, on the spectrum kind of hippies from Oxford University, right? But then like he's like certainly as a figure and all, given the significance of what happened, like, has brought the most mainstream attention that effective altruism has had. And it kind of looks like, to the face of it, for like someone who knows nothing about it other than what they read in the news relating to this guy, right? It comes across more as like a cult than like any kind of in-depth sort of philosophical movement as it actually is. So anyway, but like this guy, just to give a little bit of background, because like he became a billionaire like pretty quickly and shot on the scene pretty quickly. This guy's only been around for like a couple of years really, but he started his career as, well, I mean, he was just like obviously a really bright guy, right? So let's just get that on the table. So this guy's like in some ways like has genius qualities, right? He's hyper talented at mathematics, I think, was his sort of field, but then he got plucked from his class of and became like a investment trader because of his ability to make good judgments like on the fly about investment decisions. Like they do all these little trades and things, and he can kind of find the gaps and where to find the money. And he actually was very successful. He had a very successful career in finance before going out on his own, and then he was successful initially on his own. But I guess this guy kind of was a gambler, and it was true in his background that this was how he was brought up, sort of thing, in his career. But at the same time, a parallel kind of reckoning for him was this whole like effective altruism movement and like utilitarian ethics, and that you should care about, like, you shouldn't care about yourself. Like yourself is, he almost being selfless to care more about like humanity and that his views and his wealth and his needs actually didn't matter at all. But then even to stretch that one step further, the needs of his friends, the needs of his family, the needs of, his community also didn't really matter. But what really mattered was this higher order. The needs of his investors didn't really matter. So eventually what that led to was him taking sort of calculations that, look, it's worth taking the gamble to do all of this stuff that he's doing because I can contribute to the good of humanity in the process. And we don't know all the nuts and bolts of all the investment decisions he made. But I think what is most interesting for me with him is that it's not clear if he's a good or a bad actor in this space. Like, it's not clear that he's necessarily evil. Like, it's not like Bernie Madoff where you can say this guy was just like ripping people off for his own good. Like, this guy was doing it out of maybe a little bit of naivety. But yeah.
It's so hard to tell because when you look at all the normal things that motivate individuals, like status, greed, comforts, all this kind of stuff, attraction, they don't seem to be present in his case, right? They don't seem to be the things that are driving him, to the point where I almost see him as like a software algorithm gone rogue. It kind of almost seems like his engine or his code runs on certain principles, and he's doing his best to navigate a human world with that code. And just to kind of paint something a little bit more vivid for the listener, like when you imagine who this person is, it's not like some highfalutin, like good-looking lobbyist. Think like Bandcamp level maths geek, right? Like we're talking hardcore Silicon Valley style, like all he owns is one pair of cargo shorts and a crumpled t-shirt, and his hair is like Albert Einstein, described in the book as a Jufro, and just think of this, and very, very poor, kind of almost like on the spectrum social skills, to the point where the one that really stuck with me was this idea that even when he rose the ranks of the corporate world, and he would have meetings on one-on-one for his subordinates and development meetings, even as you were having a face-to-face meeting with him, he would be playing mobile games while talking to you. Like that level of social ineptitude, right? Like this.
Well, just on that, sorry to interrupt, but just on that was the parts of the book where it was talking about how he just learned that, like, if he made a facial like sign, like a smile or whatever, that he got good feedback, so he just did more of it. So none of it was natural, or he just said, "Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, I agree," even though he doesn't agree, like just because he got a positive feedback loop from that. But none of it was natural. Like,
and I love that. So it's kind of like these classic tropes of the real nerd, right? Like the maths nerd that has zero social skills. And I think a lot of those factors were at play. But he has this really brilliant moment in the book, and I've never really heard it described like this, because all the feedback that he had from traditional managers at his time in the corporate world were, you don't seem to understand people. You're not empathetic enough. Like you can't read people. You can't read the room. But the way he internalized that was, actually, I read the room better than anyone else, but people don't read me. And so I'm going to need to do the things that you're talking about, like nodding, showing positive body language, to almost like allow people to be at ease and understand me, or like what I want them to understand. And that's what I mean by this like really strange individual. And this idea, he talks in some of his writings in the book about, from his own journal, that he doesn't seem to experience happiness or any emotion, or at least that's how he's kind of describing himself, which further strengthens this notion that he's kind of not motivated in the same way, somewhere between like psychopathic or narcissistic kind of tendencies, but not in the way that we've kind of, popularized it in modern society. So it was a very, very hard to get your bearings with this guy. And I could see that the author was trying to do that the whole way along the book, that is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Does he know what he's doing? Is he Machiavellian? Is he just kind of autonomous to all of this? And it was fascinating. That part of it was fascinating, because it's been a very long time for me to see a character described like this, where you really had to stop and think, yeah, this is a different guy. Like this is not, this is actually, we're dealing with like a different psychopathy, right? Like we're dealing with a different style of person here that we don't really understand, and we may struggle to understand them with the modern tools that we have, like been taught around psychology. But anyway, I just want to paint that picture that we're dealing with like this kind of nerdy guy, this kind of Silicon Valley style tropes of like never dresses up, even though, he becomes a billionaire, but he literally still is in a crumpled shirt. He's sloppy. He doesn't own anything flashy.
He lived in the office as well. Like he didn't even, and he just slept on a beanbag. Like he wasn't there was no part of his life where he was enjoying he was benefiting from his money, really. And in fact, and that was the whole point. He didn't seek to earn money to benefit from it himself. He seeked to earn money to give it away.
So I think this is the next important thing to understand about this character, which is, so effective altruism. Before describing that, I think the roots and his kind of foundation at least started in this idea of utilitarianism, right? Like this idea of life or ethics in general is about a simple equation of like do, whatever outcome produces the most good in the world and reduces the most negative in the world, and look at it at a very holistic level, right? So, and that philosophy has been around for a long, long time, right? You have a certain amount of productivity in the world, right? And if your goal is to transcend yourself and do the most amount of good that you possibly can do, then how should you best go about doing that? And the really simple example they use in the book, which I loved actually, was this idea of, if you dedicate your life to being a doctor, you might save 100 lives in your career. But equally, if you have the capability or the talent to become an investment banker, you might be able to pay for 5 doctors. And therefore, you've just multiplied the amount of lives that you've saved, right? So this kind of idea that actually earning the most amount of money, and this is the title of the book, I want an infinite amount of money because then I can save the world, right? Then I can provide the most value to the world that I can by using my money for good causes and things. And he definitely had a stab at that.
I think what's interesting about this is, and you said before, the not having any feelings, right? And I think just to put ourselves in his shoes for a sec, right? If that's true, right? Why would you go out and buy a Ferrari if you don't get any positive joy or benefit from, or you don't get a feeling from it? And, there's all this other stuff about how, for him, the thing he hated the most is like fashion and the idea of, dressing up as being the most vacuous thing you could do. And there's all this side of him. And I guess that's because there's no part of him that benefits or feels any joy from that sort of stuff. And so if you are in that situation and you don't get any benefit from consuming something, and then that's your own experience, and then you look at other people and maybe you don't quite know what's going on because they all seem addicted to crack or something, when they're out buying God knows what from the shops. And you look at them and go, well, I don't get any feeling for these things. So he can't empathize with the fact that people actually value their money, people actually want their money. And then he's thinking about this in a very logical way because he's a very smart guy. He's a utilitarian. And he's going, well, actually, if we really care about doing the right thing, we shouldn't be fluffing it on all these consumerist items and things like that. What we really should be doing is preventing the next pandemic or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's where he turns his focus to. And I think a lot of people would say this guy whittled down the life savings of many good people. And he'll say these are hardworking people who thought they were doing the right thing when they plunked a whole bunch of money into Bitcoin or whatever on these exchanges or whatever, whatever investment vehicle ended up ultimately going broke, and that he did a really bad thing by those people. But I think there would be some people, and probably himself even, that would say, yeah, but you know what? The decision was made. There was a certain probability my strategy would deliver untold benefits to humanity, and unfortunately, the dice didn't land up on that side. It landed up on the side where people lost all their money, and I guess I can't do any good anymore. And he would say, but the gamble was still a good one. It was still a good decision for me to do everything that he did. And it's not clear, even today. I mean, I'm sure there's people who go through all of the different areas where he was irresponsible and where he was negligent and all of that. But at the fundamental level, it's not clear that he is is he good? Is he bad? It's
Or does he even understand those things, right? Which is funny for someone in this idea of effective altruism. And there's a couple of places that I'm curious in this way. And there's one thing that I actually do think, I agree with you. And there's that line that says it's a crime to actually let a sucker keep his money. And I kind of felt like he probably thought that. And especially with people who tend to invest in crypto exchanges anyway, these usually are people who are gambling and trying to get quick returns, right? High risk, quick returns. So, that's going on the back of my head too. But where I want to get to with all this, because we could spend a lot of time trying to analyze the enigma that is Sam Bankman-Fried. But I want to hone in on something that you said to me when you were referring the book and why you were so excited about the book. And you said to me that reading some of how it was described, it reminded you a little bit of you, and maybe on like a Black Mirror episode, how things could have turned out. And I want to just share some of the things that I thought, oh yeah, that is Andy. All right, just so we can have a discussion about this. So number one, so first of all, I'll start with the nice stuff. I acknowledge that you also are hyper intelligent, and so that you share that with this character. Now, the one of the first ones that struck me was this idea that you have used this, and I will quote it verbatim on this podcast, that the way that you see and understand humans are as imperfect probability machines. So that is literally a line that's come out of your mouth on this podcast. And there's something very similar that Sam says in his book, which is pretty much that there is a probability engine driving all of his decisions, right? And so he is looking not at things in his life not as true or false or good or bad, but a series of probabilities on a curve at any one time. And he's doing that with people, with outcomes, everything like that. And so I thought, okay, yeah, that's definitely handy. And I'll hit you one more, and then you can respond. But the other bit that was just like classic was how he was talked into becoming a vegan. So he's obviously living by these standards, but at the end of the day, his true form, Sam Bankman-Fried, is this stoner nerd that pretty much like he was eating terrible crap, and like, you know, imagine a developer or a coder in someone's basement, and that's pretty much how he was living, on like snacks and soft drinks and things. And then one day he was talking to someone about his effective altruism, and they said, if you truly believe that, you know, the easiest thing you would do to save lives would be become a vegan. And instantly he knew he was trapped inside his own logic, that here he was facing something of a innate need in his body, but didn't make sense to his own code. And he just changed it overnight, resentfully. So he became like this vegan, and this uber vegan, because that's what his kind of code told him to do. Like he had to believe his own logic, and he couldn't tolerate that anymore. And that reminds me exactly of what you're doing, fighting against your own, you know, natural position to eat meat.
I must admit that was one part of the book that I read and go, oh, that is like so true of my own experience. Like, and this is why it's hard to stick, because some people go vegan. I never went vegan, by the way. I was just sort of vegetarian for a period, and I'm kind of maybe a failed vegetarian now, but you accept the philosophy and the argument. And I still accept the argument.
Yeah.
I accept that it's like the right thing to do, but it comes out of like a rational journey of like 2 + 2 = 4 kind of thing, as opposed to really feeling it with your whole body and your whole spirit, right? You know, some people it would be part of their identity for a long time, and then they formally commit to it, and then they socialize with people who are
they're already in the circles, in the culture, you know.
It happens. But for me, it was not like that at all. It was just like, oh, actually, like, if I really, I can't square this circle, right? And part of the reason, I think the word I used in describing him was like, I don't think the way to put it is to say he's a more extreme version of me, but I kind of felt like I'm a less extreme version of him. So if that makes sense. So yes, I think if you even know what effective altruism is, you probably are someone who dabbles in things that the general population doesn't dabble in, right? In terms of, you have an intellectual curiosity that frankly isn't there among like the general population. So tick, I have that. And I must say, like, effective altruism, originally I gravitated to it as an idea because when I was at university, I wrote a paper that I think, and I've tried to pull it up, but I think I even used the terms effective altruism in the paper before effective altruism was even a thing. And I was writing this whole thing about like interdependent utility functions, like this is in economics, right? And how, you've got to achieve allocative efficiency when, and I had the whole like philosophical foundation of effective altruism before it even became a thing, right? And that's of course not saying that, obviously there's a lot of intellectual work that's gone into it from people like Peter Singer. I'm not for a second.
That was another thing. Both seduced by Peter Singer.
Yes, well, but I was primed. I was primed for this thing, right? Anyway, so I saw the way I've read all this stuff, and I was like, I totally get it. Like, I get this guy. I get this guy because he is trying to do what he thinks is right. And again, like, I'll say it again, like, I'm not so sure. Now, I think there was things he did that was wrong, because even by his own standards and criteria, he fucked up, right? So clearly he was wrong, and maybe he was not equipped to understand he was wrong. I don't know. Maybe he was, and he's a bit more sort of pernicious, or a bit more deliberately, maybe he's a little bit more evil than we think, but we don't know. But I think he was just a weird guy. Like, and I think he understood one part of the world, but like most people who are, let's say just for argument's sake on the spectrum, right? They understand certain things about the world, but then there's some things they're completely blind to. And I think that's at play here. I think the fact that he didn't see certain things, like he didn't see certain things that others saw, but then people didn't. He had won so many bets in the past that people were just like, this guy's a god, right? This guy knows what he's doing. We just trust him. All of the checks and balances that would have, like the handbrakes, the guardrails, were gone. They weren't there.
It's still there. So there's this moment when he started his first company where he did some outrageous things and took some outrageous risks, and he pretty much lost control of his company for a period of time. And then as time went on and on, they were like, oh my God, Sam was right. We should have just stuck it out, because it all worked out and they were rich. And by the end of the book, even after this disastrous collapse, you're still wondering whether if he just had more time, would it have all worked out? And actually, was he right? And I think that's a really hard thing. Like, he's obviously crossed the line in the way that financial vehicles are used and how money should be shared across corporations and things. But in my heart of hearts, could he have pulled it off? Maybe. So he might have made it all right by the end of it. And even at the end, they were still finding that, yes, there will be money to pay back a lot of his debtors. They just have to get it out. It's like a liquidity issue, which is the old trope, right? I'm not broke, it's just a liquidity issue. But in his case, yeah, because he's got this huge store of, or lion's den, as they call it, of cryptocurrencies that they have to work out how to get it liquid again.
But this is the thing. So you go to a casino, right? And you go all in, all chips on red, and you win. And so you have another bet, and you win again. And you have another bet, you win again. Eventually you're going to lose. You can't go all in indefinitely and not lose eventually. Like, you will lose eventually. And this is maybe the flaw in his approach in general.
There's one very important distinction in your analogy, and that is he is the casino. And I think that if he only let FTX operate in a more standard way for what it was, he was the casino. He was printing money, but he wasn't satisfied with that, and some of the unconventional ways he was using money between his different businesses are really what came undone, right? And this world is very complex. It's all about margins. I mean, it's high volume. The numbers are astronomical, right? And like, this is how they make their money, by making huge stake bets. And when things go wrong, and when leverages and changes happen, I mean, look at the GFC. It's the same kind of thing. It's just a house of cards. And the real problem I have with all of this is, like, you can understand this is not new territory in terms of someone who has acted with misconduct from a corporate perspective, right? But what is the real issue here is that actually, a couple of things for me, is actually less about Sam Bankman-Fried and more about us, like the public. Like, how it's exposed how easily people can be fooled, right? By like taking someone that, whether he was out of his depth or knew exactly what he was doing or what portion in between, essentially fooled such a giant portion of the elite, right? And the public. And how little maybe we need as a public to actually trust someone. A few endorsements by Tom Brady, see some figures in a crypto wallet, and all of a sudden, like, money makes right. And I think that's the reflection on how easy it is to game the system, I think, is the worst part for me, right? Like, I think that was a bit sobering.
So I think the last thing I want to say to finish this episode up is to come back full circle at maybe the core question of, is there anything in this experience that casts shade or genuine, like warrants like a genuine review of the principles of effective altruism. So I would set down 2 or 3 core principles of effective altruism. The first is that generally we should give more. So that's the first. The second is if we are going to give, we should give to the causes that actually have an impact and matter. So we should, give efficiently and achieve good outcomes in the way we're giving. And the third is probably a more, maybe another utilitarian sort of lens over it, which is that consequences matter. So the consequences of what we do matter. And that's what, like the book references, like a book that I remember reading when it came out, which is a book by Toby Ord called The Precipice. And I remember reading that book at the time. It came out sort of during COVID, I think. And it talked about like the risks of like humanity, like perishing from various causes. And like that whole effective altruism movement over the last couple of years went through this period of, long-termism, like caring about the long-term. Yes, we might like to like save starving children in Africa like today, but like there are causes that like will support outcomes for humanity over generations in the longer term. And we should be more concerned by the lives lived by the future, trillions of humans that are going to be in existence than we are sort of the 7 odd billion or however many are in existence today. And so the question then is, does this cast any shade on that? And for me, like, no, it doesn't. Like, we should still, those principles are still like really relevant. And I think the effective altruism community is criticizing. That's part of the movement. So when someone comes out with this outlandish idea that, what we really should be doing is like bringing like Derek Parfit's The Repugnant Conclusion into existence, there are people to like debate that and give it its academic kind of scrutiny, right? Yeah, they're a little bit crazy, they're a little bit wild. They're probably, people into effective altruism are probably, they like to think they're altruists and not in it for themselves, but they are actually. They're in it for the community. They're in it for
the orgies,
the sense of identity. Yes. And they're in it for the for the polyamory. Yeah, there's that. But like at the same time, I don't think there's anything in this experience other than just don't take crazy ideas to extreme. And like all of the things that have happened in the history involve someone taking like an idea to its extreme, whether we're talking like Hitler and Holocaust or whether we're talking.
But don't you think the framework kind of promotes that though?
Well, I think it's possible to deal with the reasons that those things are problems within the framework of utilitarianism. So, for example, if it produces bad consequences, then therefore it's not a good idea. And if it doesn't produce bad consequences, then maybe we need to go back and have another look. Like if we talk about philanthropy, for example, there's no way of raising capital in the same way as you would raise capital for an IPO, like through an IPO for a company, for example. Maybe we need vehicles to support, like we need to think about how we do collect money to actually do the things that Sam Bankman-Fried wanted to do with investors' money. Maybe where the people who put the money in know that this money is going to this cause, right? I still can't conclude from this whole thing that there's really much to take out of this experience for the effective altruism sort of movement, I guess.
Well, I guess the way that I look at it is that, yes, like on paper, it's all pretty good, but so is communism in a way. It makes a lot of sense on paper. I just think that what it shows me is that, you talked about a couple of episodes about being a big fan of emergent order, right? And I think that the mechanisms at play, both in the community that it attracts and imperfect people, imperfect probability machines trying to apply these principles, it promotes these like big plays, these big market disruptions, like this idea that, we're going to funnel all this money we're going to force this correction into some issue, into the market to try to get an outcome because we believe that's important. And I think when you encourage those types of behaviors and those types of market manipulations, in light of a better word, that's where you lose me. Because it goes against this idea of us trying and failing and solving these problems. It's like, how can we consolidate as much money as we can, throw this money at the climate problem, because we think that having this, $200 billion satellite in the sky is going to capture carbon, and then wonder why it all went wrong, right? Like I kind of think that I know it doesn't, the principles have nothing to do with to say it has to be done that way in this big kind of initiative, but it does promote that in terms of the style, the urgency around it, the funneling of money, the concentration of power. And I think that's where it kind of loses me.
Well, but see, ironically, one of the approaches that I think, so Alameda Research was the one of the arms associated with
quant trading,
that when they went to go and actually make investment decisions, they took a very emergent order style approach, which was, well, we don't know how to allocate the money. We know roughly what causes we want to allocate it to. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go give $1 million to all of the experts in the field for them to donate. And then even then, we're expecting like that to be a big waste of money. But the value of doing that will be we'll get lots of good information about. And so like they kind of were thinking about that. But I would
for
say
every one
two
of those,
things.
though, for every one of those of like trying to spray it around to specialists and experts, they also tried to give Trump $6 billion not to run for presidents.
Yeah,
like that's
maybe that would. Yeah, but
not,
that would probably.
See what I mean about these big plays? Like, there's not.
No,
that's
but see,
not gonna work.
but let's just take that, right? The expected value of Trump's presidency, if he wins, is orders of magnitude more than, like, as in the expected cost, maybe is the way to put it, of a Trump presidency, if he wins.
If you believe Sam Harris,
orders of magnitude more than $6 billion. So if you can pay him $6 million just to fuck off, now that doesn't mean the next guy will be like, brilliant as well. But like, hey, I mean, they were testing the legality of that. But you can see how these ideas. But all I want to say to finish up with is that some of those issues you raise around like silly ideas or people backing their winners, and it's a classic trope of like, there's nothing more dangerous than the smartest guy in the room kind of thing. And that's true. And that's like standard for human behavior, no matter what we're talking about. So I agree with that. Absolutely. But when it comes down to like a philosophical movement that should be looking at that actually does look at these kinds of questions and does hold itself to account. If a movement or like a group of people culturally are going to unpack all of the implications of Sam Bankman-Fried for how it could do better next time, like that's what effective altruism exists to do. It exists to understand better how to do good. And how to do good better, right? That's really what it's about. So it is set up to do that. And unfortunately, for this movement, I think it comes off really cultish, right? And you've got people who are really like-minded now, distancing themselves from it, sort of saying, "Oh, I was never really an effective altruist," and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, even though they've committed to, they've pledged to donate like 10, like they were actually effective altruists, but now they just, I was never really into, I was just a little bit kind of, interested in the ideas. And that's true. That's true for a lot of people who aren't effective altruists. And to be honest, my own view, I think there's a part of them that's very much like, it's a club and they enjoy like each other's company, right? First and foremost. And then the thinking about it, so I'm not part of that network. I'm not in that club. But the ideas are that's how we should be thinking about these sorts of issues. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
The most surprising thing about it all, like about the character of Sam, was that, you describing this person who doesn't have feelings and is a bit of a robot or just a piece of code in the Matrix, but he was still banging the CEO of his other company, right? He was still having an illicit sexual affair with her, and it was strange, as you can imagine, like communicating through corporate memos and grievances and stuff. And I was like, how is this happening? Like, what I need to? And then I looked up I think it was Carolyn or whatever. I looked up who this person was, and I'm like, they both look perfect for each other. These two, have you seen that? These two uber nerds, right? And I'm just like, that reinforced to me, for every pot there is a lid. And I'm just like, this is good. Like, didn't that surprise you that he actually wanted to have sex?
Yeah, I must admit it did. If he was asexual, that would have like run closer to like my prize for him. But
they can't be perfect, can they? Our heroes can't be perfect. Even the way he was describing that, his value equation peaked just when he was horny before he fucked her, and then sharply declined after they had sex.